Hey everyone, it's Shell Joker here, and it's finally over. 2020 is finally over. It's an understatement, and 4 quarters, I hope I'm using that word right, to say that 2020 was one of, if not the worst year of most people's lives. From pandemics, murder hornets, etc., etc. So many horrible things happened this year, and it does not paint the decade in a good light. And 2021 is already looking pretty shit. So, yeah, that's not a good thing. But on the bright side, I played some pretty good video games last year. Even though, in my opinion, honestly, I wasn't the biggest fan or all that hyped about most original 2020 releases, I played enough games for the first time last year to make a list talking about my favorites. Now, obviously, it's been a while since I made a list like this. I need to make a distinction. This is only, like, my top 10, my old top 10 favorite games of 2018, in the sense that it's talk about games I played in that year. Unlike that list, I will not be talking about exclusively games that released that year. Hell, most of the games on this list did not release in 2020. But, and obviously I have to play it for the first time. For this list, I can't cheat it every year and just play my 10 favorite games over again, and bam, I can just talk about my 10 favorite games every year. It has to be a game I experienced for the first time this year, and there were a lot of really good ones. Also, one thing I should note before we get into the actual list, yes, I am sick. Normally, I try to take breaks when I'm sick, but honestly, how I've been thinking about things, I'd rather just give you guys content. As long as I feel good enough to record, which I do, I'm going to record. Anyway, let's get the list of the games I played in a horrible year started. For those of you who are familiar with my older countdowns will know this actually made it into my top 10 games I most anticipate for in my 2019 list. Which, saying something considering I didn't actually touch the game until 2020. Hell, I bought the game in 2019, I just for some reason didn't play it despite the fact that I'm a huge fan of Ace Attorney. But getting the game itself, it's no doubt that I love mystery murder visual novels. I made a shining review about one earlier this year. I love them. Even though I'm only really big on 2 murder mystery series, one being Ace Attorney, and the other being one that will appear on this list later, I'm a big fan of the genre, even though technically some could say they're not games because they're really just fancy, really well-sounding books. I still really enjoy them, and even though I've already played through the Ace Attorney trilogy as separate games on my own time, since I haven't played the trilogy package until the last year, they count for the list, and I'm glad I get to talk about these games, because they're really well put together murder mystery visual novels for the most part. 2 particular cases are really bad in this trilogy. Being Turnabout Big Top and I can't even remember the name, but it's the third case in Trials and Tribulations. It blows. They really do. I wanted to hit my head against a wall the whole time. But, like, these games are great. It's honestly kind of hard to talk about mystery novels without giving huge spoilers, but, like, the characters are really well written for the most part, excluding some one-off case characters. Plus, one thing, even though I can't really say I've decided that yet, but I am leaning more towards being a fan of the other murder mystery visual novel series that I really like. But I do have to give Ace Attorney credit where it's due to the fact that the scenario is different for every case. They feel a lot more complex, even the more simpler Ace Attorney cases. Characters are great. The music is fantastic. I feel this trilogy alone has one of the best soundtracks in any video game. It's that good. Like I said, typically the cases are well put together. And a couple more that I don't like just popped into my head, but we'll ignore those for now for the sake of being positive. Characters are great, the music is great, the overall story told in the third game, since, to be honest, overall stories in 1 and 2 are sort of just Phoenix points finger at bad guy and solve case. Unless I'm missing something. Yeah, probably am, but yeah, I'm definitely missing something. But, yeah, these games are fantastic in my opinion. Characters are well written, specifically Miles, Edgeworth, Dick Gumshoe, the Faye sisters, and of course Mr. Wright himself. It's such a great cast. And the gameplay, while simple, I do really enjoy trying to poke holes in testimonies, especially people who are very uptight and want to punch, and people who are very intelligent that they could pass off for a Disney villain. Though I do have to bring up a negative for why it's so low. One, these are just re-releases of games I have played before, so technically I'm just re-experiencing stuff through a new coat of paint. But I still really enjoy it, and like I said, some of those cases I'm just not a big fan of. So, for people who have been on this channel long enough, it should be very obvious I am a huge fan of the Pokemon franchise. I mean, even if you're just looking at the countdowns that I'm even just a little proud of, aka my 2020 ones, and obviously ongoing, I'm not going to stop making countdowns this year. Where my first countdown this year was Pokemon one, where I said something good about pretty much every game that appeared in that video. And I do actually have an upcoming Pokemon video planned, so obviously I plan to talk about a series I like. Obviously. As for those... What? But I played through most main series games, so how can I still be talking about this franchise up till this point? Well, considering how I got Sword and Shield, I didn't get that till Christmas, since I had both versions before giving a final verdict on the game. I wanted to play through both versions. So, naturally, I didn't finish both of my playthroughs, and thus got my final verdict on the game until this year. Even though I first played games at least Sword. Yeah, actually no what. Yeah, it was Shield that I played first. Still finished it in 2019, but didn't finish Pokemon. So I'm just going on at this point. Pokemon Black and White 2. Despite being a sequel to my favorite Pokemon games, I didn't give them a full playthrough for a whole year. I played through Black and White an awful amount of times before I decided to do a full playthrough of Black and White 2. And as you can guess by the footage that's playing, Pokemon Black and White 2 is what I'm giving the entry to. It's not that Sword and Shield is bad. Pokemon Black and White 2 are sequels to some of my all-time favorite video games, so obviously, I think that's going to hold a bit more precedence in my mind. Now, the story. Just like the first game, I keep having to say games because versions. The story is roughly better than a typical Pokemon story. So, yeah, that's the thing that happens. I don't know why I said that. Even though it's nowhere near as good as the first two games, and we'll get to that in a bit. Story is, once again, good for Pokemon standards. Oh, it's not saying much, because outside of Colosseum and Ecstasy and debatably Platinum, stories up till now have been incredibly basic and boring. Game, obviously, it uses the same engine as Black and White, which look fantastic. I'd argue the sprites used in Black and White, at least for the Pokemon, you can argue about the character sprites not looking anywhere near as good as the modern day models till the cows come home. But I like them. They're very good. They look amazing. Cast of characters is rather strong here. I really like seeing Sharon and Bianca for a couple of years, since they were two of my favorite rivals in the series in Pokemon Black and White due to how they developed and felt like actual characters, as opposed to what quite a few rivals feel like, where they're sort of just glorified NPCs for you to beat. None of them, well, like, only a handful of them really go above and beyond and feel like good characters. But anyway, characters are really good, story's really good, it looks really good. What about that gameplay? Gameplay, it's Pokemon. If you like Pokemon games, you will like how this game controls and plays and stuff. Though one improvement that obviously goes above and beyond for this, Black and White, despite being limited to only in Pokemon for the main story, due to having the largest amount of new Pokemon, obviously it still didn't have that small roster. But this is where they up the ante with the roster. There are so many different choices, turning favorites, and still Univin Pokemon that you may or may not have used before. When building my team for the playthrough, I sure had a blast mixing old and new Pokemon because I love the Univin roster so much, and I got to see some Pokemon that I really like return. Some that I didn't really give a shot before, and I really ended up loving them. And yes, admittedly, most of the area exploration is the same due to it being the same region. Very few areas actually feel new, though the few new dungeons and overall areas, they do feel quite fun. And music, it's Pokemon music. Honestly, not the biggest fan of the game's soundtrack. It's not bad, it's just not all too many tracks stand out in my mind. And actually, what am I talking about? I don't know why I said that. I just remembered like 5 different tracks. I'm such an idiot sometimes. Game soundtrack's amazing, but I have to talk about them negatives. Cause you know, it's video. I can't just spend my time blindly praising a game. The story is very weak when compared to the original Black and White. I have to say this now. It is a good enough story. It gets the job done. But if you compare it to the original Black and White's story, it feels, it feels so bad. And I know from first-hand experience, because when I played Black and White 2 this year, I played it immediately after my 3rd playthrough of Black and White. And the void that is this story, once again, at least in comparison, really is felt. It's a case of, it's a story that gets the job done, but I can't bring myself to say that it even compares to the last game's story. And the characters, once again, the characters are not bad. Hugh is a good rival. Karen is Bianca, very well developed from their previous counterparts. Gym leaders don't play anywhere near as a major role, which is actually one of my favorite things about the original Black and White. They play a huge role. Oh, with 3 exceptions. Debatably 4. Shut up. They just, good, so freaking good. But here, the cast, aside from Hugh, Karen, Bianca, and Chorus, really, I mean, Getsus is cool again, and shows up for like 5 seconds and dips out and like, yeah, bro, I'm post-game stuff, bye. I'm just sitting here like, I know that this is nowhere near as story-based experience as the originals, I know, but they're sequels. I'm going to compare them even if I don't want to. The world building isn't all there either, but that makes sense considering Nova's already had an experience, but it's still one of my favorite things about the original Black and Whites. Though, this game doesn't really have any major problems that don't have to do with comparing to its sequel. I mean, Iris is, while I don't think the fight itself is bad, in comparison to both Getsus and Alder, she just feels like a pretty weak final fight. But that's my only real issue. I still think that this is a great game. Because if you really want to play it and you still haven't, or even if you do want to replay, don't play it right after replaying, or even just playing for the first time the original Black and White. I did that, and that's in part why I put it so low on the list. Alright, I would like to make this known. This entry's footage will contain spoilers for Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, so if you not played the game yet, or even just watched my review, I know it's a long review, but don't spoil yourself on the game. Just play it yourself, please. Anyway, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is a game that I talked about before because I made a review of it this year. I'm gonna try and be brief with most of my points because, once again, I have made a review of the game. So I talked about that really in depth in that video, and if you really want to, you can sort of just skip over this entry if you want to just watch the review, but like, yeah. So Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. It's a very good game. I used to call it one of my favorites. As of the time recording this, I'm actually almost done with the second game, so I really like that now, and thus don't like Danganronpa 1 nearly as much, but I still think it's a very good game as it's on the list. That's in part why it's near the end of the list, because so again, I no longer feel as strongly about it as I did when I first made my review and talked about a lot of Danganronpa stuff on my channel, but whatever. As for what this game does good, the basic story set for a murder mystery is very good. I love the confined atmosphere that this game gives. And one thing I will say about the second Danganronpa, because I love the game so much, I'm going to end up talking about one day, how it has very open, but like, whatever, this is mainly talking about Danganronpa 1, so ignore that. It's very confined atmosphere, so murder's happening in here for the sake of survival, essentially. It's the atmosphere and the story just works so well here. The cast of characters, with 2 real exceptions, in my opinion, are great all around. And the game has a very memorable soundtrack. The game's portraits and stuff, and the pop art style of the way the text moves across the screen in the trials, I love it to bits. The voice acting, you're still hung up about the 90s and want to see really good voice acting in a video game? Danganronpa is a very strong contender. It has great voice acting, pretty much all around, with like one exception. That's not even in this game. So yeah, it's really good. And of course, the gameplay, the trials, I do feel that some of the mini games are a little contrived. I mean, some, yeah, by some I mean literally one. And now time for negatives. Case 5 is bad, 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 and Case 6 is pretty much a plot dump. And I find Hina boring as all hell, and I can't bring myself to care about Hifumi. Besides, I love every character to some extent. And stuff. For another negative, not bullet time battle. That's one of the good mini games. Hangman's Gambit is bad. They did not really improve on it that much. On 2, but I'll get into that whenever I talk about 2. Alright, this was a pretty short segment, so I think I improved. Time for another case of a game I played before, but it's sort of just as new Call of Pay and being a port. But it's technically got new content, so I'm counting it for this list. Pikmin 3 Deluxe. Now, while it's not a series I talk about all that much, I love the Pikmin games. 1, 2, and obviously 3 are all great games. It's one of those few games that I I genuinely feel there's not a single bad release. Sure, there are problems I have with all of the games, don't get me wrong, but like, it doesn't matter to me, because, like, they're still all good at the end of the day. Though, what for Pikmin 3 do I like about it? Well, one, I do like how it actually attempted more of a story than the past two Pikmins. Because the other games are sort of just you're on planet for a reason, go find stuff. Yay. Well, this one, you're on a mission to save your home planet from dying of starvation, considering they're out of food. Then the sort of Pikmin, we lost our MacGuffins, we need to get home. Looks like we need to travel the entire planet. And okay, I guess. Like I said, I like that it tries something more with the story. I didn't say that it was particularly good all the way through. The concept is very strong. The execution is just turns to a typical Pikmin story after that. The looks fantastic, especially Deluxe. Even the original Pikmin 3 on the Wii U looks amazing, but looks even better here, since obviously the Switch is just a stronger console. The soundtrack is honestly is good, but I don't remember too many songs. So yeah. There's that. As for other things about the game that I like, the strategy gameplay is always good, fine. With two new Pikmin additions, it adds more variety to the gameplay. Obviously, rock Pikmin can shatter crystals and they don't get crushed, meaning if you have a decent number of rocks, the infamous Wollywogs are not a problem anymore. Yes, stuff. And winged Pikmin are extremely useful that they can fly over summits. So good. Even though they do shit for damage. And exploring the areas with even less than the size of a picnic ant, it's good fun. I love this scale in this series. I just love this game so much. And yeah, that's sort of it. As for negatives, once again, the story, it's very good concept. The execution is very poor though. And the final area, Pikmin 3 is the case of a game where it starts off so fantastic and I love it, but it drops it towards the very end, which is why it's ultimately on the lower end of the list. used to love this game with all my heart, but now I think, while it's good, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as I once thought it to be. So yeah, that's Pikmin 3 for you. And now it's time for another game that I reviewed in 2020 to make the list. Fire Emblem Fates. Now I played Birthright and Revelation in previous years. I also played Conquest. Also, one thing I should mention, I played a shit ton of Fire Emblem games this year. I finally finished the GBA series that did get released outside of Japan with Sacred Stones. I played through Path of Radiance, which was amazing, pretty much. Played Three Houses way earlier in the year, and that was a pretty damn good game. But out of all the Fire Emblem the Fire Emblem games I played this year, I think Conquest would win my favorite. That would be fair. It's the one that I actually played through most recently, so it literally could just be recency bias getting in the way of my general thoughts on the other games I played, but whatever. As for what I think of the game, once again, I'll try and be brief, since I have a video talking about the story and stuff. Since, I kind of made a review of the game. Hell, this one specifically talked about Fate's Conquest, but my review talks about the whole package that is Fire Emblem Fates, so go ahead and watch that. Anyway, Fate's story, similar to Pikmin 3. Very good concept, but once again, just like Pikmin 3, the execution, in my opinion, is very poor, as Corrin never changes as a character. Even on the Noru, where you're working for the main villain. And, it's just like, oh, what, you side against my country? Die in the fires of Valhalla. I don't even know if that's what someone would say. I don't know if Valhalla has fire. I didn't do my research since this isn't scripted. Though the game, once again, even though a lot of people say the 3DS models don't look that great, I like it. I think the game looks fine. It does what it needs to. And the portraits are amazing. And just like Danganronpa, even though very few lines are actually unlike Danganronpa, there aren't even fully voice acted moments, but the voice acting clips you hear are incredible. It's especially way better than what you heard in Path of Radiance, because Path of Radiance voice acting was decent to, oh my god, please kill me. So yeah, I think that's definitely an improvement. Game soundtrack. Like I said in my review, I don't think it's the most memorable in the world, but I don't think it's bad either. I think the game has a good soundtrack. Doesn't make my ears want to commit non-existence, so by basic definition, it's got a good soundtrack. Yeah. Gameplay, specifically in Conquest, since we're talking about Conquest. The map design Conquest is so good. It's so good. There's 0.5 maps that I don't like in Conquest, I swear. 0.5. The Dragon Vein is really good. Now that I've played Awakening, I can truly say the pair-up was broken and they fixed it. It feels so good to Well, I mean, Awakening, the whole thing with playing Awakening, honestly, is you just feel literally unstoppable. You feel like a boulder with a sword. This one, it's balanced, so you don't feel like a boulder with a sword, which is actually fine considering fighting games are supposed to be, kind of challenging, considering one of the main draws is if you're not playing on casual, you're dead, sucker. No more kneecaps. As for the Fates, specifically Norian characters, I love them all. I love, like, the Norian siblings. Fates cast on the Conquest side is... I love it. They're so good. Xander, once again, I'm not going into specifics, but that's only because I made a review. I would be gushing about the royal siblings right now if I did not review Fates. Takami's actually, like, really well developed in the path where you don't get to play as him. Which is really odd, where they gave him, like, all this great development where you don't play as him. No problems I have with Conquest, since I have to be fair once again. Like I said, the story is asinine outside of its concept. It's so bad. It's literally trash. Some of the character balancing, I guess, is kind of bad, but, like, that's it, really. Specifically on Conquest. Remember that. I do have bigger problems with Fates as a whole, but since we're talking about Conquest, a lot of those major problems don't occur here. And time to talk about yet another game I reviewed this year. Yoshi's Woolly World. This was actually the first review I made, so... yeah. So once again, I'll try to be brief. Story, it's literally like a Mario story. That is not an RPG. But, yeah. So it's not in the right hole about, but, like, once again, I'm sort of the guy where I believe, if you are seriously playing a platformer for the story, what are you doing with your life? No, seriously, what are you doing with your life? Platformers are not story-based experiences. Why are you playing it for the story? Obviously, as everything was made out of wool, game looks fantastic. I love it so much. Soundtrack, like I said in my review back then, and I still believe it. I think it's a bit more memorable than I say in my review now that I've listened to some of the songs again, but not by all that much. I still think that the soundtrack is far from the most memorable in the world. And yeah, that's that. Obviously, characters just like story. It's again, you're playing a platformer for, like, character interactions and well-written dialogue. What are you doing? Stop. And, yeah, stuff. Gameplay, like, the stages overall are, like, probably some of the best platforming stages I've had the pleasure of playing. Find them so fun, and I love finding secrets. Ah! So overall, this game is pretty amazing platformer. It's been a while since I played it for the sake of my review, so that's part of why it's lower on the list. It's just been a while since I played, so naturally, I don't know how much it holds up in opinions generally, since once again, been a while since I played the game. But overall, I think Yoshi's Woolly World is one of the best platformers I played. So, what I'm saying is it's very good and you should buy it. Now, it should be common knowledge at this point, concerning one, I made a retrospective on this series earlier this year. Well, I keep saying earlier this year because this is a video about 2020 games I played, but it's a new year now, so I technically shouldn't be saying this year. Celebrate the anniversary of the franchise, I made retrospective since it's my favorite video game franchise of all time. And my very first countdown was a FNAF countdown. So, yeah. Plus, William Afton made it to number 1 my top 10 favorite video game villains. And the bedroom from FNAF 4 was number 1 on my top 10 spookiest levels in video games. So, generally, I think it's fair to say that I'm a very big fan of this franchise. Though I never actually had the chance to play Helpline for myself for the longest time since it was VR, and to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of VR games. Essentially, Helpline is that one exception, really, because I think it's fascinating new tech, really, but the controls just are not for me. Which is why I was ecstatic when the Switch got a port of it. And we have ports of a bunch of FNAF games on Nintendo console, which is something I never thought would happen, but I am very happy that it has. And Helpline is a great game. I love it. Sure, the Switch port is probably not the best in the world, considering it's kind of weak. Well, I feel some of the models take a while to fully texturize. But it's just, as a FNAF fan, finally being able to play the one game that you know is fantastic, but you didn't have the chance to play. It just makes me happy. But story, it's actually a bit of a fun story, because it just seems on the surface that you're just a tester for a VR game starring Freddy Fazbear and friends, but if you find tapes, it actually goes a bit more in depth about Fazbear, the company Fazbear Pizza. I don't even know if that's the company name, but we're gonna roll with it. Hired a game developer to make it seem like the events at these establishments was very just fiction. No, since this takes place in the FNAF world, obviously, these are real events that transpired. And then, once you keep minding tapes, this character, aptly named Glitch Trap, appears. He's very creepy. Not my personal most creepy enemy in all of FNAF, since, well, technically he's not even an enemy. And by basic definition, yes, but you never face off against him in a proper night, so I don't really count him. It's a creepy antagonist. And if once you find all the tapes and follow their instructions, you have to merge with him, and he traps you in the game and presumably is out there in your real body. And yes, it is theorized that this is William Afton. Another reason to be horrified of the man. Not only is he a child murderer, completely insane, probably by this point, he can just enter the body of whoever the fuck he wants. And that's horrifying. course, that last part is a bit theorizing, but like, what's a FNAF video without some level of theorization? Gameplay, once again, it's like minigame compilation, but with FNAF. The complaint that FNAF just doesn't change and that's a stagnant game, honestly, that doesn't work anymore. Almost every game since Sister Location has some level of variety to it. Sure, even in Pizzeria Simulator, where the nights are the same, the Pizzeria Tycoon segments are very refreshing. That's enough about talking different FNAF games. Game looks great even on the Switch, even though there are a couple of problems on the Switch with models taking a while to texturize, as I put it. The voice acting featured in this game is pretty stellar. As it's a horror game, you're not really playing it for music, so I feel like saying the soundtrack isn't that memorable when you have like two or three tracks total that you listen to at most, like, unless you count ambience as ambience, yeah, the songs, I think I'm saying that word right, I don't really care. As songs, it just wouldn't be a fair complaint with the game. And of course, the gameplay, before I talk about the gameplay, this isn't really characters, like, besides disembodied voices and glitch chat, there aren't really any characters here. So yeah, I love Help Wanted. Once again, if I have to bring up problems, I mean, typical FNAF, sometimes the difficulty is just too much, but like, that's it really. I don't actually have that many issues with the game. Now, this game genuinely means a lot to me, so I'm glad that I could put this high on the list. The Henry Stickmin Collection. So, to start this entry, we're gonna have to go way back, like when I was a young kid, and I was using the internet to some capacity. There were these Flash games. Breaking the bank, escaping the prison, stealing the diamond were what existed at the time. And despite being very simple games, I fell in love with them as a kid. The personality, just everything. They were some of my favorite games to play as a kid. Years later, the fourth game, I think, yeah, that's how numbers work. Fourth game, Infiltrating the Airship, came out, and it was even better, and playing these games really made me feel like a kid again. Then, the fifth game came out, Fleeing the Complex. This took everything from the previous games and just played on a different scale, and I loved it so much. But there wasn't a new release for what felt like a super long time. So I felt that the childhood series was dead in the water. Especially now that since the rumor that I heard that Flash would shut down in a number of years, I thought the series that I once loved is just gonna be gone. Kaput. Rest in peace, old friend. Then 2020, on my birthday no less, a collection of these childhood gems releases. Not only that, a new 6th game, which is literally the perfect Henry Stickmin game with countless endings, countless choices, comes out, and it blew my mind. So yeah, childhood favorite was brought back from the dead. I wish you guys saw my reaction to the Henry Stickmin collection coming out on my freaking birthday. Like, that was legendary. But the game's general plot, since I do have to talk actually about the games now. The games don't really have complex stories, really. But they're incredibly fun to follow, so I'm gonna treat them like a well-written narrative. It's pretty much Henry trying to steal, break out, or take down something. That's it. But due to the characters along the way, even though a lot of them are basic, they're so fun. Like Charles, pretty much any member of the Top Hat clan. Particularly the right-hand man. I love his voice. Ellie, and these characters are great, man, even if they're not complex at all. Game looks great for every character being a stick man. Game, honestly, I don't remember much of the music, but like, I don't play this game to listen to music. I play it for the immense amount of personality it has. That's the main point I have. It's bursting with personality. And if the gameplay is pretty much you click a thing and then a thing happens. It's just, due to childhood memories, it had to make top 3 for me. Though another thing, being someone who's loved Henry Stickmin since they were a child, seeing some of my favorite YouTubers, like 8-Bit Ryan, actually playing this game for the first time and reacting to it, I genuinely shed a tear or two watching those videos. At least until completing the mission, since that doesn't have any level of nostalgia for me. So yeah, Henry Stickmin collection. Besides gameplay being very basic, I don't have any issues. It's genuinely amazing. And above that, I properly played the original Paper Mario for the first time this year. It was a blast, frankly. Though I've always loved Mario RPGs, to be honest, some of these I just never properly played through, even though they're great games. Yeah, Paper Mario was just that for me. Story, it's pretty much just Peach gets kidnapped, which, yeah, kind of sucks as a narrative. But, what am I trying to say? But it adds a spin on it that Bowser doesn't just steal Peach. He steals her entire damn castle! Like, what? Do you care to run that by me one more time, good sir? You stole an entire castle just to make sure Mario wouldn't get in your way. You still failed at that. Bravo, Bowser. Bravo. But, yeah, that story, it's basic, but it's such a good twist on the pre-established narrative that I end up loving it. Game looks great, especially for an N64 game. Most N64 games, visually at least, aged like a bottle of milk. In this game, nah, it's good. Sure, even the next iteration looks infinitely better. That doesn't matter to me. This game still looks fantastic. Soundtrack, I love the soundtrack. So many memorable songs such as Dry Dry Outpost. Another one is Yoshi's Island theme, General Guy's boss theme, Koopa Bros boss theme, and the final boss theme. Ugh, soundtrack's so good. And yeah, that words. Gameplay, the battle system is perfect. Okay, technically, no, I think there are RPGs with better battle systems, like Xenoblade, Tales, and Mario and Luigi. But the ability to not only block attacks to reduce damage, obviously, but to have action commands to inflict more damage. Sure, how Mario and Luigi does action commands, as I've stated, is infinitely better. It still adds variety to what would otherwise be very basic and somewhat boring turn-based combat. And due to the action commands keeping me in the action and learning them, it was so fun that I was paying attention no matter if I was battling once again a Goomba right before I was preparing for Bowser, or actually a late game enemy, because the action commands were that fun to pull off. And the game's so good, and the characters, the partners, just there's so much personality here. But I need to have a problem. I guess the narrative's kind of basic, especially when compared to the next games that will come out in the series. But like, that's it. But what could be better than a revival of one of my favorite nostalgic games and one of my more favorite RPGs that I've played in recent years? What about my all-time favorite video game? Now, those of you who have been watching for a while, you know that what I would call my all-time favorite is very different depending on the time you're watching the video. Sometimes it's Smash Ultimate, sometimes it's Super Paper Mario, sometimes it's Cuphead. Though genuinely, it would be great if I could talk through this final segment. After playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for the first time, I feel I've actually got a definitive answer. And that is Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is my all-time favorite video game. The story, it's so good. It's so good. So good. So good. So good. So good. Starts like just typical RPG story, but then it evolves into a lot of different stuff happening. Try to make all the villains kind of sympathetic, and though like I feel sometimes I kind of feel at that, but whatever and stuff. But that's not something I should be talking about now. The game is great from a narrative perspective. The goal that the main character has, even before he gets caught up in all the world-ending shit, like he wants to find Elysiums, so there can be land for everyone. They cannot die. It's such an admirable goal, just genuinely trying to survive while still not doing it in a way that I have to end the world to save everyone. That you might see an RPG plot. I don't even think I played any games where that's the plot, but like, it's probably happened somewhere. Main character's goal is admirable, and the events that happen that just change everything. It's so good. It's such a good narrative. The game is a Xenoblade game. You've heard people online gush about how good the games look, and even though sometimes I think the models aren't the best looking, I still think the game looks good at the end of the day. Beautiful sights that I like I said in my latest video before this one, in the Tontal segment from my top 10 snow/ice levels in video games, that when I walked into that area, the combination of music and beautiful scenery genuinely made me cry. The music, this has one of, if not the best soundtrack in all of gaming as far as I'm concerned. So many memorable tracks, from the boss theme to counterattack, to Drifting Soul, to the Tontal music, as I pointed out in that video. More Ardain theme. They're so good. It's such a good soundtrack. And characters are perfectly well written. This is genuinely one of my favorite casts of party members in RPG, up there with Chrono Trigger and Chrono Trigger. And and the gameplay. The battle system's pretty fun, even though the tutorials are shit. So if you think the battle system's slow and just not fun, I'm not even going to say that's your fault and you're wrong. I'm going to say the game should have done a better job teaching you. Once you master the blade and driver combos, using them together, you can do some massive damage. And the blade system's so fun because you don't have to use a dedicated healer or tank. Technically, you can make anyone your healer at any given moment. Of course, there are certain characters who are built more for healing. But the point is, technically, anyone can perform any role. Whether they do good in that is obviously up to the blades you equip and your luck with them, since admittedly the gacha system... I'm not saying that the gacha system for blades is a bad thing or anything, but if we were just had to get our blades through story events and side quests, I would not care. In fact, I would probably like it more. Now, for problems I have with the game, since I do have to mention some problems. Tutorials are bad, and like, that's kind of it, really. Like, I guess I could nitpick some of the models, but, like, even when I said I don't think they look perfect, I don't think they look bad either. So, yeah. But what makes this my favorite game of all time? I mean, I've been praising games all throughout this list. What's the big deal about Xenoblade Chronicles 2? It's more so the story, characters, and world that it puts together, because in every single story moment or cutscene, I've felt some level of strong emotion, whether it's laughing at a funny scene, crying at a serious scene, etc., etc. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is my all-time favorite video game, and nothing will ever change that. At least I hope. Anyway, this is Ming Xiao Joker, and hopefully 2021 improves for the better. See you guys then.